Why would someone around the year 1700 choose to use a small sword instead of the much more formidable rapier? Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and welcome to another corner of my garden, a little bit of a different backdrop I thought for today. And I've just finished doing a television thing where I had to have these two swords in hand. And it got me to thinking, why would someone around the year 1700 choose to carry and use a small sword when they could have had one of these absolutely awesome and much more fearsome rapiers, in this case a Spanish rapier? So this dates to probably the end of the 1600s, this dates to 1723. However, both these types of sword were around at the same time, and the Spanish kept using, Spanish and Portuguese in fact, kept using cup-hilted rapiers and bilbo broadswords all the way through until the Napoleonic era, until about 1800. So you could say in some ways they were quite backward, whereas people like the English and French and the various German states and the Scandinavians and most other people, in terms of the officers and the gentlemen, had switched to using the small sword. Now, I understand that we could very easily get into questions of mechanical advantage and disadvantage, and in fact small swords do have their exponents and champions, including even some period fencing authors who argue that this is the better dueling weapon. However, I don't agree, and I don't think most people generally do agree. The rapier's bigger, it's longer. You could say it's a bit heavier, so it might not be quite as nimble, which I think is a fair criticism, but it's got a bigger hilt, and reach really makes up for a lot. When you can outreach an opponent, in this case by about 5 or 6 inches, that's really quite a big advantage. So why would a military officer, and these weren't just carried by gentlemen, they weren't just carried by duelists, they were carried by officers in war, even right up until the early Napoleonic era. Why would you choose this instead of this? Because let's face it, the French and the British and the French were at war with each other throughout the 16 and 1700s, around the year 1700, indeed in the New World, in the Americas for example. You could literally come up against someone with one of these or with one of these. And personally, which would I choose? I'd choose one of these. I'd choose the rapier. It has the advantage of hand protection, the massive great quillons, which can be useful in defending because you can defend with the quillons themselves at the same time as counter thrusting. It's got a longer, weightier blade, which gives you more authority in the bind, but also obviously greater reach and the ability to some extent to cut down at someone's legs, for example. While a person's thrusting you in the high line with a small sword, you can move out of distance and actually cut them in the leg and still be out of distance from their thrust. So reach is a huge advantage. So I got to thinking about this. Why did people move to carrying small swords, and why did officers specifically carry these? Well, I think it's a very complicated and multifaceted topic to unpack, and I am going to come with one main conclusion at the end of this. But before that, a couple of other points to consider. Firstly, convenience of carry. That should be fairly obvious. It's much easier to wear and carry one of these. And you have to bear in mind that in the year 1700, officers' primary goal was not to run around in war killing people. The officer's primary goal was to command troops, and the troops kill people for you. So the artillery, the cavalry, the infantry, they're the people that do the real killing, not the officers. The officers might lead any of those, and in this case might lead infantry or indeed navy, but it's their soldiers or sailors who do the real bloody work. They might get stuck in occasionally, they might duel another opposing officer occasionally, but by and large their sword is almost a dress accoutrement for them to point at things and show to the rest of the world with the sword's expensiveness. This is made of sterling silver, and obviously some were gilded and so on and so forth, to show their rank, their status, their importance, and to remind their men that they are not the same. We are not the same. The officer is a gentleman, they are commoners, and this social status thing was very important still in the 18th century. So one of it is purely it's a badge of rank, but also it's convenient, more easy to wear than something massive like this rapier. Okay, Another thing to mention is actually speed of deployment. So you can draw out, if you have to, in a moment of self-defense, you have to pull out a sword very, very quickly. You can do it more quickly with a lighter, shorter sword, such as the small sword, than the bigger and heavier rapier. Okay. Also in terms of convenience of wear, getting stuck on stuff, okay, knocking against things, getting caught in clothing or bits of ship equipment. The small sword is in some ways less of a problem. It's more like an elongated dagger, whereas a rapier is a big old inconvenient thing to wear. Also confined spaces. So in a confined space, in a melee or on a ship, whether it's, you know, fighting on land, fighting on sea, sometimes a bigger rapier could be an inconvenience. If you're in there with your men and they've primarily got muskets and bayonets, actually a skewer that's not particularly long might be more convenient in a tight packed in space than a massive rapier. So these sorts of things we can consider. However, here's what I think the main point is. Peer pressure, okay? When it really comes down to it, when you decide to get dressed in the morning, or you decide which thing to wear or which thing not to wear, a lot of our day-to-day decision-making processes come down to our cultures, where we live, who we are, and peer pressure. Will we get laughed at? Now, I thought about a situation. Let's say the year is 1710, and you are a Royal Navy officer, okay? So you're an English Royal Navy officer, perhaps Scottish, Royal Navy officer, in the year 1710. You have the ability to wear one of these. Let's say you own one. You captured one from a Spanish officer. In the morning, you get up, you put on your uniform, and you know that you're going to walk out of your cabin and up those steps, and you're going to be an officer on display in front of his men, giving commands and being symbolic and representing the king. Are you going to wear a Spanish rapier? No, for a whole bunch of reasons, okay? Number one, you'd probably get laughed at. Number two, it might look unpatriotic. This is a distinctively Spanish style of sword. You might also get questioned on its practicality. What on earth are you wearing that for? Why do you need to be wearing a massive rapier? Okay, so there are all sorts of reasons why it would, even though you know this is a better weapon in hand-to-hand combat, peer pressure and societal expectations might mean that you would not choose to wear this. But you would wear this. This is an English small sword. It's a gentleman's sword, a distinctively English style. You might in some cases wear a French small sword because they were moderately popular in England as well, but English small swords are a distinctively different style to French small swords. And if you're at war with France, what would it say if you were wearing a French sword? Would people think you're making some kind of political statement, or was it one that you wanted to hint that you captured in battle when you actually hadn't really, you'd actually bought it from a French merchant? There are many, many complicated layers to society and why we decide which tie to wear in the morning, which sneakers to put on, what type of coat to wear based on the weather, the time of year. I might feel a bit chilly, but I'm not going to wear that winter coat because I know that it's not winter yet and people will make fun of me for wearing a winter coat when it's not winter. And I think sometimes when we're thinking about history, we forget that people in history are just people. And one of the huge things that dictates a lot of our decisions in life is peer pressure and societal expectations and norms. Anyway, I hope that gives you something interesting to think about and discuss. I want to just reiterate, if I was going to have a fight in 5 minutes' time, which of these two swords would I choose? Absolutely the rapier. But if I was an early Georgian gentleman, English, particularly on a Royal Navy ship or in the army, then almost certainly I would wear what society expected of me to wear at that given place and time. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton. I will of course continue to be, and I'll see you back on the channel really soon for another video. Cheers folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks.